Hi everyone. Let's talk about The Strokes. The Strokes are a Manhattan indie rock band that have been at it for over 2 decades. 2 decades. Their debut album in 2001 was a very important album for the 2000s garage rock revival scene. This is an album that showed the Strokes probably at their most straightforward, with tracks that most of the time range between 2 minutes and 3 minutes. The longest song on here is only 3 minutes and 58 seconds. As a whole, it runs 36 minutes long, and for what it was short, quick bursts of energy, but with a wide-ranging appeal to most audiences. Critics loved it back then, fans love it back then, fans love it to this day, and their sophomore effort, Room on Fire, is also well received. However, I would say after their third album, they've kind of hit or miss, for me at least. First Impressions of Earth sounded like their previous 2 albums, but not with the same amount of energy. Angles was a change towards a new wave direction that some fans like, others didn't. But I think most fans will agree that Come Down Machine is their weakest album to date. Now, that album was released in 2013. Between then and now, the Strokes weren't completely silent. The vocalist and main brain behind the Strokes, Julian Casablancas, had his own side project titled Julian Casablancas and the Voids. In 2014 releasing The Tyranny, and then in 2018 with Virtue. Now, this other project from Julian Casablanca was not just some other offshoot for indie rock and post-punk revivalism. It was actually a wide array of genres, from synth-punk to neo-psychedelic to experimental rock, hypnagogic pop, post-punk, art rock, noise rock. Virtue was even more of a wild card in the genre department, infusing more elements of experimental rock. This time you got synth-pop and alternative dance. So Julian Casablanca has been active for the time that the Strokes weren't making music. One of the guitarists, Albert Hammond Jr., put out 2 solo projects, and probably some other stuff that I haven't talked about, but it's been 7 years since the Strokes put out their last album. Is there anything different with this album? So the Strokes are back, but I wouldn't call it a return to form in any way. Because for one, this album incorporates more elements of synth pop than their previous efforts, but not to the point where it's an overarching genre term to describe this album. This is definitely still an indie rock album. However, most of their garage rock revivalistic sound that was in the 2000s don't really show up on this album. Post-punk revivalism does, as well as new wave that was showing up on their previous 2 albums. And if you've been keeping tabs with the Strokes up until this point, you know that the garage rock revivalism sound that they were pushing in the 2000s weren't translating all that much into their recent albums. I would argue that this is probably the furthest they've sounded from their 2000s material. Given some of the singles leading up to this record, I was hopeful that this album was going to be good. The first single for this album, At the Door, was a 5-minute synth pop track that featured these buzzing synthesizers that were really chill. And then you have Julian coming over this instrumental, and if there's one thing I've liked about Julian as an artist, it's his vocals. This dude has some great vocal chops, and I love his vocals on this track in particular. The way he can reach into his higher register and not make it sound annoying or like his voice is cracking is almost angel-like. Then you have the chorus that kicks in, and you have these beautifully layered synthesizers that are laying underneath Julian's voice. You have a bass that's also playing in the background. Overall, this song comes together in a really beautiful way, and it sounds pretty simple, but it's much greater than the sum of its parts. I didn't really care for the jangle pop sound that was Bad Decisions. I find Casablanca's voice to be a little grating on this track. I feel like he's trying to get into his higher register, but for a very short period, and he's not hitting this high note. However, the track does progress into something that's more digestible for me. The song does have a happy side to it that is undeniably smile-inducing. I didn't hear Brooklyn Bridge to Chorus as a single because the record was on its way, and I was like, I can wait a few days. So now we have the album, The New Abnormal, 9 tracks, 45 minutes, and I gotta say, first and foremost, the production on this record is immaculate. It feels like every instrument, every synthesizer, every vocal harmony, every bass note is purposefully placed. A lot of these songs sound like they were worked on very meticulously and methodically. For example, there are some moments on this record where it feels like there's an instrument playing, but it's panned 40% to the right. For the track Eternal Summer, there is an ad-lib that's underneath almost every single instrument that's played throughout most of the song, or the bass line that's underneath the chorus on the track Why Are Sundays So Depressing. I also like some of the drum rhythms on this album too, like on the opening track, The Adults Are Talking, with an intricate drum rhythm that's playing throughout the entire track. At first I thought it was going to be pretty distracting through the entire song, but it actually fits really well. I also have to talk about the track Not the Same Anymore, because this song feels like it could fit perfectly, I'm talking perfectly, in a soundtrack for a coming-of-age movie. Like, I could easily imagine this song being played at, like, the climax of that movie, where it's this person messing up and doing something wrong and like, oh, they need to fix it. Come on, the somber guitar melodies, Julian Casablancas' vocal performance on this track in particular is great. Everything melds so nicely into a song that I can just envision someone trying to run after another person to. There are moments on this record that are nothing shy of great, no doubt, but there are also moments on this record that I find to be kinda tedious. I mentioned this earlier, but the song Eternal Summer is the longest song on this album at 6 minutes, and I would probably call this the weakest moment on this record. It sees Julian trying to get into his higher register, but it comes off really annoying, and the progression of the song in particular is very slow. Every time I'm listening through this album, it's this song in particular that I'm just waiting for it to be over. Seriously, it takes its time, and not in a good way. The track Selfless, I don't know why. The song's great, but I always forget what it sounds like every time I listen to this record. I don't know why. It's like I have like amnesia while listening to this record, and I just completely blank out while listening to Selfless. The song Brooklyn Bridge to chorus, listening to it in the context of this record, does feel like a moment that, in some respect, is kind of out of place. Amongst these kind of somber, sad tracks, you have a pretty jaunty, almost jovial song. You have these very upbeat synth stabs that are playing throughout the entire track. More uplifting synthesizers are introduced to the song as it progresses. And I kind of feel like Julian over this instrumental doesn't match all that much. It kind of comes off like he's moaning a little bit. And again, this instrumental is lively, jovial, joyful. It's just I don't want someone murmuring over this instrumental because it doesn't feel like it matches properly. However, as a cohesive album experience, it's very enjoyable. I found a lot of these songs to be interesting, unique, and I appreciate that the Strokes are stretching their songs out to longer lengths. 5 minutes, 4 minutes, there's not a 2-minute cut on this album. So I can appreciate that element of this record. However, I thought this album was good. Just shy from great. For one, I like the passionate, very ethereal soundscapes that some of these tracks provoke. Other moments are very upbeat, jovial. Other moments are surrounded by sadness. But sometimes, like on the track Eternal Summer, the ideas can get very repetitive and very stale quickly. And while there are great ideas on this album, I always question while listening to this record, is the song over yet? That's something I should never be asking. However, I like the sounds that are presented on this album, even if I think sometimes it can go on a little too long. But still, I understand why people like this album. Hell, I like some of the songs on here too. At the Door is still a great song, a great single nonetheless. I also think the closer for this record is really good too. But as a whole album experience, it's just shy from greatness for me. I think maybe if there were more songs that weren't as long, or if these songs are going to continue to stay this long, at least to be a little more engaging. Before we have, it's a solid Strokes album. I'll give it that. So for me personally, it's a very solid B. However, I am curious to know, what are your thoughts and opinions on this album down below? Let me know what albums you want me to review next, and that is it. Leave a like, comment, share, do whatever you want. Let me know how I can improve future videos down below. Remember, this is only my opinion, because music is subjective.